As you know, throughout the summer, there was serious conflict in Israel and Gaza. When we were looking into the issue, we came across a young British man who was planning to leave the UK to join the Israeli army, and we spoke to him about his experience.
So this person wrote on their Facebook status, fellow King's College London student Darren Cohen has gone to Israel to fight for the Israeli Defence Force in its ongoing campaign to massacre the Palestinians. And then there's just a lot of very harsh comments like, why is he allowed to fly? He should be in prison on terrorism charges. He's tricked us. He uses his sly Zionist techniques. If anything, it just makes me feel justified in my decision. He's so ugly. Oh my God, what a top dickhead.
As Israel has pounded Gaza in recent weeks, it says it's targeted militant sites.
This was a mosque in Gaza City. Locals say it was hit by 6 Israeli bombs.
Even if you are the strongest critic of Israel going, there is an atmosphere of hostility towards Jews. That makes me feel that maybe it is difficult to live in, especially in France as well, and generally in Europe. It makes me feel I do need to live alongside like-minded fellow people who are my brothers and sisters. I believe in the cause of the IDF. Whether I agree with every single action it ever does is another question. I have no issue whatsoever with joining an army which is doing what I think is defending its people. Because a lot of people, when they start seeing an opportunity to attack Israel, start to very slowly attack Jews too.
In Manchester, police describe a significant increase in anti-Semitic hate crime.
And you've got people in Scotland saying that they want a Zionist-free Scotland, and you've got Jewish cultural institutions like the Jewish Film Festival being banned from theatres. And when you've got MPs calling for a city to be Israeli-free, not just IDF-free, no Israeli academics, no Israeli culture, no Israeli tourists. I mean, what, are we living in the 1930s? How can that be seen as legitimate?
OK, so the question is, are the protests against Israel encouraging anti-Semitism? Hugo, are they?
You know, I was saying while that was on, I've never done a debate before where Israel's the easy bit. But the interesting thing about that little programme we just watched is that's a young man who is emigrating to another country and going to join its army. That's what some people want to do. Now, people could do that to lots of countries. This could be somebody who's emigrating to Nigeria and joining the Nigerian army, emigrating to France and joining the French army, emigrating to Turkey and joining the Turkish army. If we see that as different, what we just watched, as different to all those examples, we're getting into a dangerous place, I think. I don't believe that even criticizing Israel, that supporting Gaza, necessarily entails anti-Semitism. Of course not. I frequently criticize Israel in the columns that I write. I'm Jewish and proudly so. However, I think very often it does bleed into anti-Semitism. Not always deliberately. I think it can be done carelessly. I think it can be done in a difficult way. Actually, a Scottish audience would understand this well. People can criticize Scotland in a way that can infuriate and irritate Scots far more than they mean to. And I think quite a lot of the time when people talk about Israel and criticize Israel, they end up holding Jews in this country responsible for it, and in a manner that wouldn't happen with many other ethnic groups. And I think that's a problem that we have to be aware of. Obviously, anti-Semitism is on the rise in this country. It's on the rise terrifyingly so in much of Europe, particularly France. We need to be on top of that.
Okay. Are we on top of it?
I mean, I agree with everything Hugo says, but I think we also need to make the important distinction at the anger at the Israeli state and the people who support that and the Israeli government. Because let's not forget, there was many Jewish people across the world in Israel as well protesting against that, which, I mean, you've seen that in the video. They say they're targeting militants. They took out an entire street there by the looks of one. It's disgusting. I mean, let's call it what it is. It's war crimes. But at the same time, you have to remember why this particular cycle started. Was 3 innocent Jewish lads were kidnapped and murdered, you know. But I think you have to, there is obviously a rising, but I think you have to distinguish between anger at the Israeli government and anger at the Jewish people are there.
Yeah, gentlemen.
I think that anti-Semitism only occurs in the small-minded people, but anti-Semitism is wrong, but what's going on in that part of the world is also wrong, very wrong.
Yes, lady here. It's coming.
Yes.
It's arrived.
What the Israeli state may or may not do may very well be wrong. People can criticise that, and people can also criticise Hamas for sending thousands and thousands of rockets into Israel, which nobody mentions either, or the fact that people have to run to the bomb shelters, which are everywhere in every building in Israel, and they have literally a couple of minutes' notice to get there. That's why there have been such less loss of lives. But I tend to think that the media campaign on this particular conflict, when so much is going on in Syria and Iraq, and a lot of the stuff with ISIS and Iraq is down to British faults of going into Iraq in the first place and destabilizing it. We were responsible for killing 180,000 Iraqi civilians that nobody seems to mention about, that it is very asymmetric. It seems to be easier to protest against the democratic state that Israel represents than to go out and protest against ISIS, to boycott Israel rather than to go off and criticize ISIS in such a mass movement. There hasn't been a public outcry, a mass movement of people on the streets about what's happening in Syria and Iraq, but there is about this that's going on in Gaza. It isn't that what's happening in Gaza is right, but there is so much people, thousands of people every day are dying, and this is the thing that the media seem to be focusing on.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Joe?
I think it works in other ways as well. We've seen, attacks on Muslims because of the stereotyping of their religion. I mean, I'm a great admirer of the Jewish contribution to our culture and our history, which is probably second to no other people. But I would distinguish that completely from the actions of the Israeli government at the moment, which are disproportionate.
Tina, what are people saying at home?
Yeah,
about
quite a
this?
big reaction coming in. This one from Sebastian on Facebook, actually. Yes, like the Islamic State being the reason Islamophobia exists and the actions of countries like Pakistan. This one says Zionists using the persecution of Jewish people to justify Israel's persecution of the Palestinians. This man, Darren, isn't signing up to defend Israel. He'll be another IDF soldier involved in the murder of many children and the colonisation of Palestine and persecution of its people. What do you think about that? Do you think Darren's defending Israel, or he's involved in the persecution of its people?
Well, he obviously
Gaza?
he believes he's defending Israel. I mean, this isn't a simple conflict. Israel. I mean, I've been there several times, mainly in a professional capacity, and in a personal family. I have family in Israel as well. It's a mess. The Israeli government has pursued, to my mind, quite destructive policies for quite a long time, in that there is no reasonable leadership they can speak to in Gaza, largely because they've arrested or killed quite a lot of them, and those that they haven't killed, other Palestinians have killed. It's a terrible mess, but what that means is a terrible mess. You reach a point where reasonable behaviour is no longer possible. I mean, I question whether if we were sitting here now under threat of rocket attack from near neighbours, our behaviour would be much better than Israel's. And I think the more we try and portray Israel as a pariah state, the more we lump it in with the true madmen of the world, the more that inclines Israel's behaviour to be poor, because why not? What's left to lose?
Yeah, lady up here.
It's not about the Israeli state or Hamas or Gaza. I think it's about innocent civilians dying. I think people seem to forget that.
Lady here.
So I think also, yes, Israel is under attack, but it also has hundreds of thousands of pounds coming from America to defend themselves, as opposed to Gaza, which doesn't have that protection.
Okay. Yes, lady here in the red wants to respond.
Oh, they have millions of dollars coming from Qatar, for example. I mean, it's not that they're underfunded, it's that they choose to use that money in a different way, for example, building terror tunnels. So,
But, I mean,
one side has chosen to protect its people, which is why fewer people die, and the other side chooses to exploit its people. And sadly, I think that the media campaign, it was terrible. The coverage in the last conflict was terrible, very, very biased.
Okay, Ruth.
I think we have to be really careful on two things. One is we cannot confuse a nation state with a faith or a religion. So you have to separate the state of Israel from the faith of Judaism. These things are not concurrent. Now, yes, Israel is a Jewish state, but there shouldn't be no anti-Jewish backlash for what a nation state in the world does. And I think the point that this lady made here is a very powerful one as well. Let's not get wrapped up in a hierarchy of suffering. I mean, there are casualties here from both sides, but primarily on one side, and we have to be able to help. And the way in which you do help in a conflict as intractable as this one that's been going on since before I was born is stop the violence, so ceasefire, get people around a table, and as Hugo says, try and find leaders within the communities that can work together now. And this is tough. Now, there is no glib soundbite or easy answer to this. If there was, it would have been fixed by now. But I think what we have to try and do is try and take the foot off the gas in terms of blaming people. And don't get me wrong, there is blame on both sides here, and let's not be blind to it. But there has to be a movement within the international community to facilitate that too. And that's not picking sides, that's getting people around the table and go, this has gone on for decades and it needs to stop.
It's obvious there has to be, the only way it has to be two nations. I mean, the people of Gaza need to have international rights recognised. They need to be protected by international law.
I mean, if I may, it's always worth comparing what happens in Gaza with what happens in the West Bank. Because what used to happen in Gaza and the West Bank, on the other side of Israel, the other Palestinian territory, used to be pretty similar. Whereas over the course of pretty much the last 10 years, two things have happened. Well, three things have happened in the West Bank. One, they've built an almighty great wall around it, which is a bit more contentious than the rest of what I'm about to say. But secondly, they've cracked down in security terms, but most importantly, there's been massive economic investment. I've been into the West Bank. You drive through, your cell phone goes bing, and there's a mobile phone network, and there's coffee shops, and there's this sort of thriving industry there. When you've got thriving industry, you've got a lot to lose, and when you've got a lot to lose, you're more encouraged to dialogue, and the people who you're going to have dialogue with are more wary of destroying the infrastructure that's there. When there's nothing there, it's very easy to fight on both sides because you've got nothing else to do.
Yeah, gentleman in the pink shirt.
Yeah, maybe just to come back to the original question about the effect on anti-Semitism. I think that it has caused anti-Semitism because, as points have been made, that they are lumping in the actions of the Israeli state with with Judaism and Jewish people. And very sadly, that's something that's present even in Scotland when you have, frankly, bigots like George Galloway making these hot-headed statements, and that encourages this vicious cycle where you get backlash against that and you get hate from both sides, from people who identify as Jewish or Muslim. Because these debates encourage people to identify themselves with the actions that are happening on the ground, and that makes it much more difficult for sensible, reasonable people to be heard. And what you get is people like George Galloway dominating these debates, especially in the countries that are not so involved in these conflicts.
Yeah, gentleman here.
I think ultimately the way that we end anti-Semitism is by educating, but not just educating the children that are in school now, but the people who already have these perhaps more extreme views. We need to teach them to have respectful views and to deliver them in a respectful way.
But how do we do that?
Well,
It's not easy. It's not easy. Yeah, just not here.
It's not how we do it, it's how they do it across there. They have to do it within themselves, teach each other, get around the table and work from there and bring a better Israel in Gaza.
Tina, I'll tell you what I've missed, the power bar.
The power bar, yeah, it's back. Let's get a snapshot of what the online audience at home think. You might have seen that we've been running this question at the bottom of our screen. This, of course, is the power bar. Just use the hashtag free speech yes or hashtag free speech no to give us your view. We've also had some answers in already. Just to give you a recap, if we can get the power bar back, please. 48% think yes, 52% think no. And the comments that we're getting in, this from Jade, there's protests against Israel and not ISIS because our government supports the former. This from Sean, the protests are encouraging anti-Semitism. I think they mean aren't. The heavy-handed, arrogant and frankly abhorrent behaviour of Israel is doing that all by itself.
Okay. Yes, this has been... Sorry, you've had your hand up for ages.
What greatly concerns me is that in 2014, the only way that we can actually solve problems in the world is through murder and war. I think that really worries me. I think going on, there's been certain deals done by Britain. David Cameron was actually just involved in a negotiation which sees Britain actually helping with this idea of trying to control the Islamic states there and dividing them. That greatly concerns me. I think that we can do so much more, and I think that there's a lot better ways of dealing with these kind of issues in the world. I also think that if we look at, you know, the uprising of different groups, separatist groups, whether it's, you know, in Nigeria we have Boko Haram or it's ISIS. What is it? If we look at Boko Haram, for example, they only came into inception in 2009. So what we should be asking ourselves is, what is it that we're doing that is causing so many people to feel so disenfranchised from, you know, the society that they need to actually kill each other? I think that's what we need to be really discussing.
I think you're probably right.